Welcome to the Shunned podcast, where we expose religions that use shunning as a tool to control people. Before we get into today's story, I'd like to take a minute to promote something that I have coming up. Starting Sunday, March 10th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, I will be leading a coaching/support group for people that are interested. The goal is pretty simple. We're going to work through our past to discover things about ourselves that will help us in our present, and we're going to kind of figure out who we are and then work on trying to compose a better future. Life's about growth. It's easy to get stuck after leaving a cult. So I'm looking for just 6 people to participate in this. If you'd like to join me, go to the website shunnedpodcast.com, click on the coaching page for more information. And I don't know, hopefully you have really nothing to lose here and a lot to gain. I think that it will be really beneficial for people to work through some of this stuff and to kind of discover some things about themselves, because a lot of times that's really covered up when you grow up in such a controlling environment. All right, so now let's go ahead and get on with the show. Today we have the story of Nicholas. Now, Nicholas was a member of an online ministry that seems to have some of the hallmarks of a cult called Is, Was, and Will Be. So, yes, it's the title is, Was, and Will Be. It's a really unique look into how this cult gets its hooks into somebody that's never even been present physically. If you really think about that, it's one thing to get somebody into a cult when you have the love bombing physically and all the physical, people are coming to your door and things like that, like in Jehovah's Witnesses. But imagine getting sucked into an online world where your fellowship is primarily through email chats and a website with information on it, or maybe they have videos or things like that. There really has to be some profound mental games being played in such an environment. And this is a really good look into some of them. In fact, I don't mention it during the interview, but there were several times during it, and I actually mentioned this to Nicholas later, and he kind of agreed, but the term gaslighting comes to mind. So, without further ado, let's get to meet Nicholas.
My name is Nicholas. I'm 34 years old. I was a member of the Is, Was, and Will Be cult, and I am shunned.
All right, Nicholas. So then, how did you come to be a member of that particular cult? Was it later in life?
Yeah, I was around the age of 21. I had kind of had some exposure to the Bible before then, mainly through my own interests and pursuits. And I didn't actually have anybody in my immediate family that shared that interest until my mother married this guy, and his dad was like an ex-minister and that kind of thing. And he and I would start having Bible discussions, and I kind of noticed that he and I had a similar view of the scriptures. We kind of had a spiritual, like really trying to kind of look at the spiritual meaning behind certain things, which I hadn't been exposed to in my experiences with religion before then. So I was definitely like drawn into discussions with him, and he recommended this Bible teacher named Ray Smith. And at the time, he had a very large online following because he had basically created this website, and he had meticulously dismantled the entire doctrine of eternal torment and sort of showing through the scriptures that, everlasting punishment, going to hell, all of that stuff. He's just completely dismantled that whole idea and how all men will be saved in the end. And when he was telling me about this teacher, it instantly resonated with me as being true. And I guess to shorten the story a little bit more, I started reading his papers, which led me to a different teacher named Mike Vinson. And at the time, he had just started a website called iswasandwillbe.com, where he had his own teachings. And I started reading his papers, and they were very ultra like spiritual readings of the Bible. And I was just really drawn into that. And so I talked to him off and on for about 3 years by email. And it wasn't really like a church at that point. And this was the cult that I ended up joining. But at that time, it wasn't really a concrete like fellowship. And but within 3 years, it was kind of more of an established church, and it was by that time that I was a regular member, I guess.
Wow, that's a pretty fascinating journey. I believe you said it was Ray Smith started you off kind of with breaking down the teaching of everlasting torment. And I was
Hmm.
just thinking, what a great lead in that is for anyone, because a fiery hell is a great fear for a lot of people. And so if you can break that teaching down, that is going to be something that's going to have impact on others. Um, from my uh, view as a former Jehovah's Witness, that was actually Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in a fiery hell, and that is something that is very attractive to a lot of people. So,
Yeah.
so I can definitely see how just even that one point, getting involved in that way, starts you down a path, and then you leads you to Mike Vinson and this other, his teachings. So you then, I guess, were directly involved, or maybe involves the wrong term, but you were around at least for the very beginnings of this new cult, which is a
Hmm.
unique. That's a unique place to be. So we'll get
Yeah, I
into
never
that.
thought of that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very few people get to be at that point. I'm not so sure that's a great thing, but it's a unique thing. you
Yeah,
know.
and they had, and Mike Vinson had actually been in fellowship with Ray Smith at the time, and
Mm,
I just now like putting the pieces together, like that group, like Mike Vinson's group, basically formed out of separating from Ray Smith based off of a doctrinal difference. Um, and so yeah, it was definitely like that's kind of when it all began for Mike Vinson, and he may have developed followers or people that were into his thing because of that connection to Ray Smith.
wow, it's interesting how these things all play off of one another. I mean, um, I don't know how many cults are really created in a vacuum. It seems like a lot of times they spin off of something else, and usually it is some doctrinal difference, something they want to set themselves apart from that other group that they're breaking away from. Um,
Hmm.
so let's get into your background a little bit. Before you got there, um, was there anything? What was your childhood like? Growing up, what was it? Most people, like we've talked about before, don't just end up in a cult for no reason. Usually, we have things that happen in our lives that kind of attract us to it. I know, you know, for in my own family, I believe anyway that it was probably my mom had some trauma in her past. A lot of times, people are looking for certainty, looking for something um, that strikes a chord with them, and sometimes it strikes a chord because they have other things in their past that kind of lead them in that direction. So, kind of what was your childhood like? What was it like growing up? Were you mentioned that you weren't super religious, but you kind of got involved later. How did that kind of play out for you?
Um, well, my parents split at a young age, and my mom basically had no, like, there was no like church going or talking about praying or God or anything. There wasn't like any of that kind of. um, in the background. But my dad, he he was he was definitely more drawn to and interested in like the Bible and uh, trying to kind of figure out the world, I guess. And I remembered when I would visit him when I was younger that he had all these books on his shelf about studying the Bible, and he himself studied the Bible, but he never like tried to teach me stuff about the Bible. It was more like I kind of saw his interest from a distance. Um, and he did take me to he did go to church at the time. He's since left the church as well, but he uh he did take me to church sometimes when I was younger at Pentecostal kind of churches. And but I can't say that it really impacted me at that point. Um, the real impact came when I got a little bit older. I was like, 9 or 10, and I visited my family in Austin, or I'm sorry, not Austin, St. Louis, and they were very involved in the church, just kind of general Orthodox Christianity, and their entire family, very large family, would like read the Bible together, pray together. And one thing I noticed when I visited them was that their family system was very peaceful, it was very orderly, and there was something about it that was like a relief to me in some ways when I would visit them. And so I would, if I received any indoctrination, it would have been through them, or any influence. It was mainly through them. And it was actually my visits with them that created my first interest in like getting a Bible, like reading the Bible. And I remember, and so after that, I kind of studied the Bible on my own, or at least reading it and thinking that there was something important there, but not really knowing exactly what that meant, I guess. So that's kind of the uh, religious background that led up to everything, I guess.
Yeah, and it seems like there might be even kind of a was it you talked about the peace in this family. Was that something that was attractive to you because your parents had split, or had that happened occur yet? Just wondering if maybe sometimes you can see this peaceful family dynamic, and maybe that kind of drew you in because that's something you were really wanting in your own life at that point, as a kid.
Yeah. Um, it's kind of difficult to describe, but there was definitely something living, there was definitely something in my home life that was not stable. And I remember actually, I recently remembered this, that when I came back from one of those trips to St. Louis, I remember actually having the courage to tell my mom at the time that I wanted to move there and to live there with them. So, I mean, in retrospect, that's not a really good sign for a
No.
child to be saying that. Um, so yeah, there must, I'm still, now that I'm out of the cult system, I'm actually starting to look back at all these things and kind of process things a little bit more. Things happened even outside of the cult that are that kind of set up a false view of the world, I guess.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. And yes, I do think that coming home and pretty much being like, I want to go live with those people, that's not a good sign. Whether it was the family dynamic or whether you were just attracted to um, the teachings, I guess that were leading to what you saw in that other family. Um, yeah, that's not really great. I don't know. I'm just starting to learn about attachments myself. and attachment styles and things like that, and the way you're supposed to attach to your own family as a child and things like that. And it's a fascinating study itself as to how we connect to things. And
Yeah, definitely.
a person with a great secure attachment at home is typically not going to want to go live with someone else. And I think that you're definitely not alone there. I think there are a lot of kids who grow up and kind of feel the same way. So
Hmm.
so you started getting some interest in the Bible. You've got this extended family there that has kind of gotten you off on that start. How does that develop as you progress as a child into your teenage years, into young adulthood? Because I think you said you were pretty young then. How does that continue to grow, I guess, until you end up where you eventually ended up?
Um, well, there was also this other dynamic of growing up where, I kind of had the realization through my peers at school that there's something a little off about me, and I got kind of, it was a slow realization that I'm gay, and that wasn't something that even my mom, who wasn't trying to push any kind of like religious stuff on me, like it was still something that wasn't approved of. And so I think from an early age, like there was kind of already this like self-annihilation kind of thing growing, where you have to like somehow like deny deny a certain part of your personality, or who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was already kind of primed for that concept of denying the self, killing the self, things like that. But it didn't, there, and this is all stuff that I'm learning now, way after the fact. But like, there's the concept of like dissociation, um, through traumatic types of things, and so when I look back on the process leading up to the cult joining, I can see now that I was like so incredibly dissociated from my own perceptions of the world, and what I really felt about things. And so I kind of don't really see myself as sort of like my authentic self back then.
Yeah.
Uh, but at the exact like specific time that the cult came into my life, I had just gotten out of about a year after I'd gotten out of a 4-year long relationship, and it was a relationship with a girl. And you know going back to dissociation and really not being taught anything about what I was dealing with, I kind of didn't put things together, and I just thought that my intense interest or my enjoyment with spending time with her and that kind of stuff was, indicative of who I really was. And so whenever that relationship ended, I really definitely felt like I didn't know who I was, and I was kind of afraid of that part of me. And so, yeah, I mean, that was kind of the stuff that was going on right before joining the cult, along with some career changes and things like that.
That's wow, that's a really fascinating observation. Just the part about the self annihilation or annihilation of the self, and I could only imagine what it must be like. Like you said, your family wasn't specifically religious, but um, just growing up and realizing that you're, in quotes, different um, than other people who are portrayed as the quote norm in society. For I'm glad that it's changing, that there is more and more acceptance as time is going by of our differences. But I can only imagine how much the um, the vilification almost in the culture of being something different, of something as intimate and personal as one's own sexuality, that has to uh, that really has to be so difficult. And I hate to see that people get stuck in. And I guess there's nothing wrong with trying to find yourself. I think we all do that in a lot of ways. Um, but sometimes that comes through a denial of who we really are, and I can definitely see how that could set a person up to be ripe for the pickings when something comes along that is all about denial of the self, um, which most of these cults are. I mean, it's all about them. It's not about you.
Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't really put those things together until recently about, I didn't even need a cult to tell me that I had to deny myself. And I mean, I know that's the truth for a lot of people, but
Yeah, I mean, what's part of the word culture is cult.
yeah.
And when you look at the prevailing culture of American society, being different has never been, or has often been a problem, and it's not as accepting, or it didn't used to be. I guess it's getting better, but still have a long way to go as far as accepting the other. But it when you grow up in a I guess it's just really a human thing to do. We're all very tribal. Um, when you grow up in a mindset of seeing people grouped in these different tribes, then it's easy for a person to start denying who they are to try to join a tribe, because we all want to fit in. Everybody wants to fit in somewhere, and it's very difficult when you feel like the odd man out. Um, I'm really sorry that you had to face that, within yourself, as far as your sexuality went and everything. I know that's very difficult for people.
Yeah. Um, I hadn't, yeah, there was definitely that relief, like you found your tribe. There was definitely that feeling because I don't know exactly how it is with Jehovah's Witnesses, but in our cult, suffering was a really important thing, and it was really, like that's our purpose in life is to suffer and suffer for Christ and to kill the self and experience this the pain of losing your life. Like those are all really, really good things and really noble things and really heroic things to do. And that, so I don't know, like I may have blended the two together or something. And I thought, well, maybe the reason why my life is, um, seems like I can't really live it, that means like that's why I kind of resonated a lot with this
Oh,
group
wow.
because like, oh well, yeah, maybe God has been calling me, this entire time. He's been preparing me for um this very specific group of people, which is also very ironically very self-righteous way of twisting it all. But they like, maybe that's why all of this has happened, is because I'm a part of this group that God is calling to experience this, extreme suffering, or, and actually like understanding and agreeing with our doctrines, which I also, they resonated with me. So that was even more indication that, oh, maybe this really is who I am now.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Yes, Jehovah's Witnesses have a very misery-based view of the world. Um, that it's, as they call it, this wicked old system of things. And I think it attracts a lot of people who are kind of down and out, or have had a hard time conforming or fitting in or succeeding in this world. And so, rather than looking inward, it's easier to just say, hey, this is all part of a plan, and God has set these things in motion. And instead of being an, see, you can be special in different ways. You can be special as an outcast, or you can be special because you're being persecuted, and it's almost like a persecution complex. You're suffering because because it's part of God's plan, and or just part of, as they see it, this wicked world that we live in. So that's
Hmm.
that's that's pretty fascinating, because that is a lot of there is a lot of suffering based feelings, as Jehovah's Witnesses even, and I imagine that's, in fact, I've talked to Brenda, who is FLDS, and different ones. Yeah, there is a feeling of being special, and a feeling of making things right, or being right, and at the same time things going so utterly wrong and being so painful on the other side. And the religions kind of help smooth all that over, these cults, by telling you that, yeah, ultimately these bad things that are happening, or this pain that you have, that's really because you're special. And what a great sales pitch, because so many people on this earth, we all have pain in our lives, and if somebody can take that pain and make it a special thing that you actually think is good, uh, they can easily draw you to them. And I can definitely see how that would happen. Um, that's interesting stuff. I've never made That's an interesting connection. How did they? So how did you? I mean, you talked a little bit about how you went from Ray Smith to Mike Vinson, how you kind of got in that realm in the first place. Um, how what was it? Let's see. What was
What was
it?
the
What's that?
what was the appeal of Mike Vinson?
Yeah, yeah. What was it? I mean, was it just the suffering aspect? Because I mean, obviously, you had a lot of pain in your life. You're denying who you are. I mean, that I can't imagine. I mean, I know how painful it was just to deny myself and be inauthentic as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, let's say. But to deny your own sexuality, and like you said, there were other things going on in life with some career changes and such. When you're in that point of upheaval, what was it that, can you say, or maybe you can't pinpoint, what was it that attracted you to Mike Vinson?
Um, I think I keep one memory that stands out from that specific transition is, this Mike Vinson's group like really focused on the spirit. Like, I mean, that was like probably the most uttered word, like in everything that we talked about. And this idea that there is a spiritual understanding of things and there's a natural understanding of things. And so I think that was the thing that really compelled me at first, was this idea of having a spiritual understanding of the world, and that if I had a spiritual understanding, then the world would make sense now. And so I remember specifically praying at that time for to be given a spiritual understanding of things. I mean, even Paul talks about this a lot, I mean, about having a spiritual mind. And so I remember specifically wanting that. And so whenever I would read papers written by Mike Vinson and they made sense to me, I thought that meant that I have a spirit, that I'm being given, spiritual understanding, which is apparently some unique thing, that only the group has. And that was really the biggest thing that first drew me in. Um, and I mean, I can describe a little bit like our doctrines. I know that some of them are very similar to Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, actually,
Um,
I'd be interested in what the doctrine kind of was in a nutshell, because
um,
I think a lot of people would be fascinated to hear that.
so the way they read the Bible was from cover to cover, every single word. There was not a single word that was looked over as an insignificant. And um, along with that, there was a real focus on deriving like the spiritual meaning behind the letter and kind of getting past the letter because the letter blinds people to the true meaning. Jesus spoke in parables so that they would not understand, and only a few people would understand what they really meant. And so that was kind of the general philosophy about reading the scriptures. As far as like really specific doctrines, they themselves would say that we have no list of doctrines because to have a list of doctrines is like a Orthodox thing to do. So they would just say something like, "The Bible is our doctrine." Um, but over time, you can kind of isolate the big things that sort of drive everything. And I'd say the number one thing is like God is 100% sovereign. So, God creates good and evil. God is working all of it. There's no like God allows it or anything like that. Like we literally have no say in the matter. He's written the entire story in advance. We have no free will. Um, and also, the world is basically divided between the true church and everyone else, and that the Orthodox that Orthodox Christianity specifically is sort of like the great deceiver in the world because they're mixing, truth with lies, and so they're like deceptive on a greater scale. um, and also, if you're believing the ways of the true church, and you sort of resonate with it, you resonate with like the suffering, and all that, like then that means that you're special or you've been called out or whatever, and that now your job is to be as Christ. So they're very specific about how it wasn't just Jesus Christ in the flesh, it was also about him calling on disciples as well that would basically have the same experience he had and in our lifetime, at least spiritually, not necessarily physically. So we may not necessarily be persecuted or hung on a cross or things like that, but that we would basically be living the same exact suffering that Christ did on the earth to overcome the earth with him. And so once you've gone through your life and you've overcome the world and overcome yourself, then that makes you a part of Christ's rulers. I think in Revelation it talks about how in the
Is that
first how in
144,000?
yeah, how in the first resurrection, like Christ, like Christ and his rulers, like that there's multiple people that are carrying out this process of saving the world. and bringing the rest of mankind into the fold. So yeah, there's that idea that if we stay on this path and we overcome and we're faithful to the end, then we will be in the first resurrection. And then if that doesn't happen, then it's still God's will. And if somebody is shunned or if they have a doctrinal difference, then that means they were never really a part of the group and things like that. Big focus on killing the self, having Christ sort of take over your thoughts, and everyone else is blind and led astray, specifically by God's will. So it's not like they're deceived in a way that is somehow usurping God's will.
Yeah, so is
But
there a belief in Satan or the devil?
oh yeah, but it's a belief that he was created by God.
So, okay, I got you. So he still exists. So it's not, in other words, it's not God who is orchestrating the good and the evil, but God created the devil. And so, therefore, I guess directly or indirectly, he created the bad things that go on.
Yeah, so if someone
Interesting.
is if someone's deceived for, according to them, then God has sent an evil spirit to bring that about.
It's interesting because there's a theme that I'm hearing as you're saying all this. There's a theme that I'm hearing, and it's almost, I want to say it's acceptance, but acceptance is healthy. It sounds like resignation. It's like, so you have a God who's pretty much resigned. Good and evil happens, whatever, just accept it. Or no, just be resigned to it. Don't try to influence it. Just let it happen. So be resigned to that. And then it sounds like you're also to be you as a follower in this one true church are supposed to be resigned to whatever happens in your life happens, and there's nothing you can do about it. And even the teachings when it comes to this spiritual outlook, and it sounds like you're not really trying to, let's see, how can I say it? You're not really trying to glean any solid points from anything that happens. You're almost just kind of resigned there as well to whatever happens. It must have been God's will. Um,
Oh yeah, definitely everything gets filtered through what you're going to learn about everything in the world spiritually.
yeah,
So it's not about, yeah, it's not about,
but that spiritually thing is so it's so nebulous. There's no real form to it.
right.
So you're just kind of resigned to, well, that happened, and then it sounds like you're not really trying to. It sounds like each person can kind of make it their own on a level. Let's not have rules, so to speak. Let's individually. It seems like if you're individually looking at each thing that happens in your life through a quote spiritual lens, and if no one seems to be trying to solidly interpret that, it seems like it's kind of everything is kind of open to interpretation a little bit spiritually. So then you kind of get to make it what you want. Would that be an accurate depiction?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I definitely heard numerous times, like if something was perceived as a contradiction in scriptures, they'd say something like it's because you just don't have you just aren't seeing it spiritually. Um, and yeah, and that's actually stuff that I struggled with in the group, whether I vocalized it clearly or aggressively enough. But those kinds of mysteries over time really do, you start to wonder, after a certain after a certain amount of time, like, what are we really talking about here? You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like there's not a lot of form to it. There's not a lot of substance. It's if everything's open to interpretation, then what really is there? um, um,
Yeah, it's that's why I guess maybe that's why the group was so heavily focused on studying the Bible all the time. So our focus was kind of like on interpreting the scriptures and learning about our heavens, like that's what they refer to a lot as our mind. Um, really getting a sense of what's happening in our heavens spiritually, which in retrospect, now that I'm out of it all, it's really interesting a lot of the parallels, that you can start to see about what the scriptures are kind of alluding to, the things that happened, psychologically. Um, except the problem with these religious spiritual groups is that everything gets put into this framework of something nebulous and something that you can't see, something that involves spirits sort of, you know, going through our minds and, this sort of like other alter reality that's sort of there all the time. So, I mean, we were kind of getting specific, but really just in terms of interpreting scriptures, I guess, and learning how to deal with the mind, I guess. Like what, like what are lies and what are truths, basically, and how to sort of see through things that are lies, I guess.
so, what are truths then, according to them? Because it sounds like it's kind of open to interpretation, almost individually.
Yeah, that
Or is it
they would
open to
say,
interpretation? Was Mike Vinson the one who was truly interpreting everything, and everyone was to follow his interpretation?
um, I don't feel like I have yet like a concrete sense of the really high specifics of what was going on with the teachings. I mean, even out of it, like it, I like, I would like my response to the question of what is truth according to them would be their focus on things like sort of the mind of Christ, basically, is what they would call it. Like developing the mind of Christ, the way you respond to things, the way you um, operate, I guess, in the world, and like that those things are truth, I guess, and that they're all encapsulated in this mind of Christ kind of concept.
Gotcha. And and so now I'm going to ask, what is the mind of Christ? Because it seems like each thing becomes like the next level of, I guess, a phrase or something. Like nothing seems very concrete. And to be quite honest, like it sounds like um it sounds like a very philosophical mind fuck. The whole thing. It sounds kind of um I don't know. It's almost like they're letting you leaving you to your own on some level, but kind of more almost like directing how you do that or something. It's an interesting concept.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. It's um I did like I don't really know too much about other cultic kind of groups. I didn't know if it was like if that issue was like common with other groups or not, but I mean, yeah, there was definitely. I mean, I remember saying to one of the elders at one point that it feels like a mind game.
Yeah.
Like it feels like everything we're doing is and I wasn't saying this like out of like trying to challenge them. I was saying it out of fear. Like, what if all of this is a mind game? Um, so yeah, I have a vague understanding of your confusion, and like it's just like it's the way that I like it's the environment I was in for so long, so I don't really know how it's perceived by other people. So it's interesting to hear.
Yeah, it just seems very undefined. Um, you mentioned that. So let me ask you. So, what was life like in it? I mean, did you have to go live with them, or um, how did you play out this life? Obviously, there's a website, so it seems like you can probably maybe do this wherever you are in the world, or does that draw you to them in some way?
Um, yeah, it's a online kind of group, and they people usually find them by doing a Google search on some topic or something, and then they start to read teachings on the website, which there's thousands of teachings, even down to like the spiritual meaning of the color white and like everything.
The spiritual meaning of the color white.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they'll like take apart like all these references to white in the scriptures, and you know, that's a weird detail that I'm just now like starting to realize like they could literally like they had to have material to really support that mysterious group, like what are we actually doing here? And so like that's what they do, like that's how they perpetuate is like through all of these really really intense detailed studies. So it kind of becomes so focused on the book, like
Yeah.
on the teachings, and not. And yeah, I kind of get what you're saying though
Wow, it
with
is. It is just like a big mind game. It really is.
um
That's interesting.
but yeah, it was an online ministry, and so people would just kind of find them randomly and then read a couple of papers and go, wow. Or actually, a lot of the members came from Orthodox Christianity, were maybe even kicked out, like ex, people that were shunned from other groups
Yeah.
because of their beliefs. And so, like, they'd find Mike Vinson's group and they'd say, like, wow, like, the the people that I've been looking for my entire life who actually think the way or like believe what I believe. So it was a very scattered group, like all over the world, literally almost. And but still, there was maybe only 50 really active members. Um, so yeah, it was online Bible studies through like GoToMeeting or things like that, like every day of the week. We had an email forum, um, and we also had conferences, or we had like meetups in person as well. We'd usually have like a couple big get-togethers a year, and then if you lived by anyone locally, you'd often travel. So I mean, I actually met Mike Vinson right before I came into the cult because he actually lived an hour away from my family in Georgia, which was kind of a weird realization. But so I went and visited him after we'd been talking for a while, once I realized where he lived. So there was also like in-person element, but it was not as common as sending an email or making a phone call or things like that.
Gotcha. So how do you join? How does a person actually like what is do you get baptized or something or how's that work?
Um, that's kind of creepy now that I think about it, um, because they're really isn't a concrete system. So basically, someone will contact Mike Vinson or one of the elders and talk about their interest in the group, I guess, and how it resonates with them. But it's really weird now that I think about it, how inside the group, which is, you have to be on this special email system or a special email address, I guess, um, that you don't really hear about people coming in until, or when new people kind of come into the group, it's really through this email system in a way. I mean, there are some people that weren't on the email system and would just come to Bible studies online, but usually when people came in, it was almost like they were they like when they came on the email system, they weren't coming there to see if it was a right fit. Like they weren't like it was almost as if they came in already knowing like this is the group for them.
Wow, so
And
they were almost like pre-sold.
yeah, now that I think about it, it's
That's good
like it's kind
marketing.
of weird. It's kind of weird that most everyone seemed to come in like they had made up their mind in a way, like this was their people. And um, so no, there was no like official process for bringing someone in, but there's a very, very official process for removing someone. Um, so that's kind of odd now that I think about it. That they basically, I guess you just kind of show your fruit, I guess, like your fruits of the spirit is what they would probably say to your question. They'd say, well, if somebody's showing fruits of the spirit and they're contributing and they're in agreement, that must mean that they're a part of us or something.
Well, to be honest, I'm just taking notes here because I have a Facebook group now for the podcast, and I'm just starting my own little cult. I get people pre-sold with this whole podcast is just a facade to bring people into my group, and that's when I really have them hooked.
I'm sure you get, I would imagine you may have gotten some detractors at this point as well.
No, actually, I do have one. I mean, I have some people who go on iTunes and leave me 1 star. You know, they'll click the 1 star thing, but there's only one person so far who's left me a 1 star review and actually had the guts to speak up. So that's kind of interesting. Maybe I
Yeah.
really am starting a cult here. I don't have any detractors yet. I,
Yeah.
oh, maybe I'm doing this wrong, or maybe I'm doing it right. I don't know. Yeah, it's really fascinating though that just like anybody can kind of wander into this email loop that you've got in this cult, but they're coming deep down the line already. So is there like some sort of like an unseen process? Or is the copy on the website just that good, or what is it that's getting them hooked,
Well, yeah, there is actually, at least in some examples, there is kind of I think there is a selling, I guess, of the group, because I have noticed in some correspondences that are made public or even stories I've heard since I'm out of the group that, a lot of times people will write to Mike Vinson or somebody else in the group and they'll start sharing all these things about their life and, you know, and how the teachings make sense to them. And a lot of times you can definitely see that very subtle indication from Mike or one of the other leaders that, yeah, maybe there is something really special to this. And, so there is, I think, a pretty fast or quick jump, I think, on Mike's end or some of the other leaders. If someone writes to them, that they immediately probably commiserate with the person more than speculate.
Sure, sure. Well, it's basically a suffering based cult, so I'm sure there's a lot of commiseration on that end. Um,
Hmm.
so let me ask you, what is in this for? Because in most cults, there's something in it for the person at the top, um, whether it be money, power, sex, um, notoriety, maybe feeling special themselves, like they're the Messiah or they're saving people or whatever. Do you know? So, like, did was there a lot of? Did you have to do a lot of contributing financially, or again, that's what I'm doing with Patreon, in my own podcast here. What was it that got people? That what was it in it for them? Like there, you would think that there would be something in it for them.
That's been one of the things that's really challenging to kind of pull apart in the aftermath is what was the real benefit. I mean, I can definitely see some benefits. Like, I'm not saying this was the case for them, although in the past week I've heard some developments about this group that kind of confirm this suspicion. But there's definitely the possibility of some kind of power, although they probably wouldn't call it power. Um, and then I guess cultic systems have like this unspoken, unconscious sort of process of, like getting to the top maybe, or, like there's just sort of this subtle process where people end up getting sucked in and like wanting to be helpful. And then if people start saying that they're wise or they have a lot of wisdom or something, then like thoughts may start churning like, oh, like, is this, should I be a teacher? So there's kind of this built-in culture, I guess, in itself, there, that has something to do with power or rising to a higher place. But no, there was not any really obvious signs of like the cult exploiting people,
Hmm, interesting.
because there was no asking for money. There was no, although it was talked about occasionally, um, there was no like overt control, like people getting like labor out of people or things like that.
Now you mentioned I think in one of the emails I think you actually called it an authoritarian cult. Where what would you say made it authoritarian to you?
Um, well, the because it was really strictly governed by a group of people. So there's maybe five people that sort of ran the thing, except Mike Vinson. He would say that he's not the leader, but he definitely acted that way. But so they had a group of leaders that would kind of make decisions, like hard and fast, like doctrinal decisions about things. And so it was authoritarian in that sense.
Gotcha.
Um,
And then you
Not to
were
mention,
expected to conform to that new doctrinal belief.
yeah, I mean, they could say like you can leave whenever you want, or you can believe whatever you want, but there's also this whole other layer of baggage where you're already in that belief system. So I mean, like, um, if you leave, then that's really the ultimate kind of being lost, I guess.
Yeah, okay. So if you leave, you are seen as supremely lost. What now you mentioned earlier that if you do try to leave, so there's no process for getting in, but there is a process when you leave. So, um do you want to discuss, so what that process is, or would you like to tell your own story and how this all played out for you?
Um, well, there's not really a specific process for or for people that just want to leave. Um, a lot of times people will just kind of drift away or, without saying anything, or they'll um, bring up some issue that they have, whether it's doctrine or whatever. Um, so there's no process for people just want to leave, but there is a process for if the person is um, really trying to influence maybe their disagreement. Um, so if someone is really like disagreeing, then there's a process that the church, deals with that disagreement. And then if they don't conform to whatever the official statement is, then they're shunned or they're kicked out. Um, and they have this. They'll just alert the entire church, about the person and the disagreement and where and not to associate with them any further in business or like associate them with them in no way at all. um and that the purpose of this shunning is to make them ashamed and to their phrase was to let Satan destroy their flesh. Of course, in a spiritual context and everything,
But
but
wouldn't that be suffering? It isn't suffering optimal.
yeah. So there was, like every few months, I don't know, maybe not that frequent, but there was at least 10 people, in my 8 to 10 year involvement that there was at least 10 people that were shunned, and probably, a handful of people that just kind of disappeared. Um, oh, and if they shun you, this if they shun you, there's also this process of coming back in. I don't know that it's a concrete process because I never witnessed it, or I never saw like this concrete process take place. But they say that they have to do they have to inspect you spiritually, if you were to come back.
That sounds creepy. What does that mean? I mean, I'm sure is it just like they just email back and forth with you or something and make sure that you're legit or
Yeah, the sad thing is I don't think that they really have a system for that, and
gotcha.
that's just something that they believe in their minds. Like they'll talk with you maybe, but to call that a inspecting for spiritual leprosy, as they called it, it just it's basically I would imagine just a conversation with someone, but I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what was what was it? Let's see, before I get to what woke you up or how you got out, um, your life inside of it. What were your feelings when you were inside of this? It seems like it's had quite an impact on you. Maybe I don't know if psychologically is the right word, but it's been somewhat traumatic. This whole involvement with it. What was it that really got to you in a negative way?
Um, there was I think about 3 to 4 years into it, I was when things really started deteriorating for me. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, like just the basics?
Oh yeah, I just want to know. You've obviously had somewhat of a traumatic experience through this process.
Oh, okay.
What was it? What was it about being involved in this cult that was, I guess, so traumatic for you? What was it that really messed with you?
Well, I'm like 16 months out of it now, and um, I'm still kind of figuring that stuff out, but I have isolated some things. There, there was definitely like there was definitely like this sense that I wasn't growing in the group. Um, that I wasn't developing the quote unquote fruits of the spirit that the group was. And, because after a few years, I can't really say why specifically, but like I started to really get very confused about all of it and very like disoriented, because I was just like trying to understand everything. And it was always always this dynamic of somebody telling me what the truth is and telling me what the reality is. And so after a certain amount of time, like I trusted the leaders more than I trusted my own mind. And so um, if I didn't understand something, then that was me dealing with a lying spirit, or me being deceived, or me not having enough faith, um, things like that. Um,
Seems like a lot of
and
self doubt and self questioning.
yeah, and what's weird is I hadn't in all that time I never really doubted, like I never questioned, like, is this a cult, or am I in something that's bad for me? Um, and but I did, I think subconsciously I kind of like I mentioned earlier, like feeling like it's all a mind game. Like those things really started to bother me, when I would realize things that didn't make sense or certain contradictions to me.
Hmm.
Um, but it was like I didn't really feel like I could go down that path of really, really questioning it. And then if I did, they would always have an answer for for everything, every confusion, and there was always some meticulous breakdown of scripture, and um, so I guess uh, the stuff that was like damaging, I guess, would have been like being in this group and like feeling trapped in a sense, because this is the way the world works. This is God is sovereign. I have no free will. So like he apparently, willed all of this to happen. And so if I'm not growing, um, and I don't belong, and I don't feel like I belong to the true body of Christ, like just that fear of like, well, if I don't belong there, then where, then I definitely don't belong anywhere, because I agree with this group. Like that was the real disorienting thing about it, was like I agree with, like I the things they talked about made sense to me to a certain degree, and I thought that there was a lot of meaning to what the group held. Um,
But if you then didn't fully agree, and then you had this lying spirit or whatever, so then it's almost like God was rejecting you. Is that kind of how you felt?
Yeah, that was the sense I had over time was that because their definition of God loving someone is if he, that technically, like, this goes back to the whole nebulous, like, spiritual concept. Like, spiritually, God loves everyone, but also he only loves the like the true body, and those are his true sons, his true children. So you definitely get that impression after a long time, like, well, if I'm not growing and they're hinting at this idea that I'm not molding and I don't belong there, that I maybe am not really a child of God. And to add to that confusion even more, they would get mad at me if I felt like I didn't belong. So then if I said, so then if I said, these are the kinds of things that are really like hard to like extract like from my brain. It's like it's so weird, like that that if I said that I felt like I didn't belong, then they would say I was listening to a lying spirit. But if I was feeling things or thinking things that, or not growing, then they would be the ones to kind of imply that I don't have enough faith, or and then it slowly devolved into getting worse and worse. Um, they Now I will say that there was also an element on my end that I'm still trying to process through, but like, whether it was some type of, like you were talking about attachment trauma earlier, if there was some trauma that I brought into the group that was exacerbated or something by this group, or if um, stuff happened inside the group specifically, but I, I was very unstable in the cult when it got to like 4 years. And so I was like really badly, like emotionally dysregulating and dissociating, even though I didn't know I was doing that at the time. I was constantly confused. Um, and I would pretty regularly, like every couple of weeks, have some kind of confusion breakdown, and I would seek out the help of other people in the group. And so when that goes on for many years, it starts to wear down the group as well. And it wasn't um, it wasn't like I was lashing out at them or disagreeing with them or things like that, or just like complaining or something. Like I had a really strong drive to understand things and to make sense of it all, and for God to answer my prayers, to finally give me that special thing that everyone else has. Um, but over time, it slowly devolved with them to, thinking that I was accusing them of certain things, that I was trying to like dominate them, and that there was something about me, I guess, that they considered a threat, um, that was trying to divide them. Um, I have no conscious awareness of trying to do that. um,
This
but
sounds
that's kind of the things that they developed as far. So by the end, there, according to the group, there was something wrong about me, or something to be cautious about.
And then did they kick you out, or how did you end up out?
Um, yeah, I kind of sensed that I was going to be shunned, like, um, a couple weeks before it happened, because, um, I guess, like I could sense that whatever that was in me that was unstable and not really responding well to this environment or whatever the environment was triggering or whatever it was, like I sensed that that part of me was like um growing stronger. So there was definitely this sense that I was going to be shunned a couple weeks before it happened. And so uh the very day that I was shunned, I kind of shared this personal thing with the group that, just sort of like realizing what had happened all these years in a sense, and trying to like accept that I didn't, that apparently God wasn't bringing me into this group. And so I shared one morning that I felt, God had pushed me to this place, like he had driven me to this place, and that I was having that me having all these struggles um, was sort of driving the group away, maybe, or causing issues, I guess. And so I kind of was coming to that realization and acceptance of that, um, of what God was working in my life, and I said that I don't know, it was just kind of a resignation and acceptance kind of thing. But anyway, so when I sent this message out to everyone, a few responded very angrily that I had accused them of abandoning me when I the intent behind the message was that I felt God was abandoning me, and that I understood why why things weren't working out, I guess, and why there was this natural sort of division happening, I guess, between the two of us. And they like automatically took that as me accusing them, which happened very frequently in the last year. That I would say things, and they would say I was accusing them, and I really was so confused, like trying to figure out how I was accusing them, privately, like trying to work through that. Like, was there something I couldn't see? Um, and so,
Buddy, I gotta tell you, I'm listening to this and I'm confused. um, just that the way they act and everything, it sounds like it almost sounds like uh, it sounds like you were a really sincere dude who probably had a little pain in your life. Well, maybe a lot of pain in your life. I mean, just the whole sexuality thing alone is enough to be a lot. And you were. It sounds like you were a sincere dude with some pain who was trying to fit in, who found a group that you thought you could fit into, and it sounds like you tried everything you could to fit in, and these people had at best a confusing um, doctrine of that. I don't know, like the whole doctrine thing. It just seems like I said earlier, like a mind fuck. And then it seems like whenever you bring something else up, like it's almost like you were in a group of narcissists, and anything that you brought up, they made about themselves. Like you said, you weren't accusing them, and they made it all about them instead of about you. And
Yeah, I mean, it gets confusing because they did devote so much time to me, and but yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, but that becomes very difficult afterwards because you realize like, well, but they were so um, giving and kind and patient, but um, at a certain, but then you have certain moments where you realize like, wow, that really makes no sense too. But yeah,
I mean, sometimes you have a thing where there are people who are pretty narcissistic or whatever. A lot of times, there's some of the more charming people that you'll ever meet, and that's just to lure you in. And or maybe they just flip flop. I don't know. I mean, it's very. It sounds like you spent 8 years, and was this something that you did like? I don't know what the frequency was. How often were you in contact with these people?
well, because I was a part of the email group
Yeah.
every day, um, so like I would receive emails from everyone and like the group emails and um, yeah, I was very that's the really weird thing. Like I haven't even told you uh the specific reasons for the shunning that they gave me, but they the really ironic thing is that I was so devoted. I was so devoted to that group. Like there like at the time I wanted nothing more than to have what they called the one mind of Christ and to be in unity with them, meaning for me to not um for for me to not have the confusions that I had that would cause issues, I guess.
Yeah, you wanted to fit in. You wanted to be one of them.
And I did fit in with them the first 4 years or whatever. Or I would have moments of understanding that would come, and they would talk about how they would relate to it, and there's just this weird back and forth. It was very confusing of like sometimes I belonged and sometimes I didn't. And I can't tell if that was something that was happening internally or something that was kind of happening because of the environment. Um, but anyway, like, so I mean, the reason, so yeah, they thought I was accusing them in that message, and uh, they so they swiftly called for my shunning from the group, and they gave me multiple reasons. They said I was trying to destroy the church and divide them. I was trying to spiritually murder the flock. That I was literally creating spiritual bloodshed. That I was antichrist. That I never belonged the entire time. That I was trying to deceive them that whole time. Like I was some kind of I don't know, like some kind of person that knew that they didn't belong. Uh, consciously, like they were trying to like I was trying to deceive them and uh, manipulate them or something. They also said that I was abusive, that I was mocking them, and that I was a sacrifice of God for their benefit and growth. Meaning, I spent all those 8 to 10 years, and I only got worse. But they actually that I was actually created, by God. This was the implication of that statement, that I was created by God to be brought into this group to cause tribulation for this group so that they would grow and become better saviors, of the world and grow in their faith. Um,
That's
and
pretty
also that I
that's
had
stern words.
do what?
I said that's pretty stern words. That's quite a rebuke.
Yeah. So there was multiple reasons, and I believed them. Like I believed everything they said. Like that's what's so weird to me is like just the contrast of them thinking I was deceiving them or trying to destroy them, that I actually believed everything they told me when they shunned me. And it took a while to not believe it, but
And how long have you been out now? You said was it 18 months or something?
yeah, 16.
16 months. Um, I I don't know. Maybe this is a bad comparison. Did you when you broke up when the relationship ended with your girlfriend? Did were you the one to break that off, or did she?
I did.
Oh, you did. Okay, gotcha.
Hmm.
All right. I was just wondering. It almost sounds like I think I was just wondering if you just because it's honestly a lot of what you're saying here about this group. It almost sounds like a bad relationship. It's almost like you got into a relationship that you thought was good, and then like the guy or girl at the end, like you think everything's okay, and then at the end they end up, and you're trying so hard, and then at the end they end up dumping you anyway, and just what a heartbreak and how awful that would feel. But this was even more than that because it wasn't just a relationship, it was your belief system, it was what was in your mind and heart. And so it's really hard to be cast off from that, and especially to still believe it. There are a lot of people who are what the term is disfellowshipped from Jehovah's Witnesses, usually for some sort of behavioral issue for having sex outside of marriage or whatever. But anyway, so they're disfellowshipped, and although they're outside of the organization, they still believe it. And that's such a hard place to be cut off from the very people that you thought were your friends and you thought were your spiritual family, and then that you still maybe even still believe the same doctrines. So how did you start actually, I guess, waking up and getting healthier? Because it sounds like you were cut off, but you still believed, and you probably did. You still want to be a part of them? I mean, it kind of sounds like you did, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the week following that, like they didn't like kick me out. I mean, there's no permanent shunning, I wouldn't say, for this group. Um, but they basically said like, um, you know, you have to be away from the group for at least a year, and that you have to return if you return, we have to see fruits of the spirit, and we'll have to like really inspect you, and you'll have to like attend the Bible studies online, but you won't be allowed to like say anything or like as if I was at that time trying to say things to the group to confuse them or destroy them or pull them away from God or something. Like, so they said, if you spend a year um, attending the Bible studies behind plate glass and you end up showing fruits of the Spirit when you return, then you can be back with us again. But after a week of sitting, it actually didn't take me very long But after a week of sitting with that, I kind of realized, I'd already reached like a certain threshold in the group. So um, to have to spend a year like with that belief system, trying to figure out like, is it God's will for me even to be part of this group? Like that was too much to like accept to go down that path. So I kind of stopped thinking that way, and I started really researching things and learning a lot about things that I'd never really looked into or researched or thought about in great detail. Um, Elements of like there was actually I was working in my shop one day, and I was listening to this audiobook by Joseph Campbell, and everything that he was talking about mythology and like the human experience and all that kind of stuff. Like it was sort of the first inspiration I had to really like it really connected with me and started connecting with ideas or thoughts that I was having in the group, whether I was conscious of them or not. I started studying the really um, detailed stuff about how the Bible was constructed. Um, Seeing, like I started looking into other religions and realizing that there was some other, mainly Eastern religions that are have a lot of the same like spiritual concepts that our group had. Like slowly realizing that our beliefs um, weren't as unique as they claimed they were, and even I claimed in the group. And learning about like group psychology. And so like there was like a 6 month time period after the shunning where I really just immersed myself. And honestly, a lot of it was driven by fear because I was afraid that everything they said could be true. So there was kind of an anxiety about the process of going down that path of things that they would call deceptive, because I was just afraid of the idea of being deceived or something.
Yeah. So they said that anything on the outside, I mean, was it like specifically self help or whatever, would be quote deceptive if it wasn't from them?
Yeah, they'll start like people like the world will start propping up your loving yourself, or just things that like
Yeah, you might actually start loving yourself.
their understanding of it's really weird, like as really detailed as they were about the scriptures. Like I've realized in retrospect that even these like much older teachers that have been in the world longer than I have, like seeing now the things that they thought about science or about philosophy or um, history, even like to see that it was so like, or even their understanding of psychotherapy, like their understanding of those things was so um, incomplete, and they totally had this depiction of those things that were not really the reality that I found outside of the group.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. There are a lot of people who have claimed to be special, and to have special groups and special knowledge uh, throughout history. There are a lot of people that have followed those men or women, and um, we can look back now. It's the information age. We've all got the internet, and we can look back now and see how incomplete and how flawed those systems of seeing the world were, and so that has to be kind of jarring. I mean, I know it is. I know in my own experience how it is to wake up and start reading other things and getting other perspectives from people on the outside who were deemed deceptive or whatever. And it can be kind of scary at first, but it can also be very freeing once you start realizing that that you are free and you're out, and you can find other paths of being.
Yeah, definitely.
So do you what are some things that you've learned that have really made a positive impact on your life since you've been out?
I guess like the idea of autonomy, like having a person, like being um, completely autonomous from like groups and people and things like that, and uh, sort of a growing idea that I can be my own person with like my literally my own truth, which is something couldn't have like imagined believing in the group, because in the group I would have said there's only one truth. And uh and I think that's true for someone to say, like, for themselves, in a sense, like, not that your truth is everyone else's truth, but that your truth is like the truth for
For you,
you.
yeah.
Um and so I think um really having to be brought like into that place, like really it also like starts to make you question the world at large too, to some degrees, like because I kind of discovered that I have like this, I mean, I know it's common, but like an impulse to like find like some system, like, or some way of thinking about something. And people naturally want to understand things. And
We're
so I
all
think the
looking for
most
that. That's why there's like, 7 easy steps to lose your belly fat, and stuff like that. I mean, like that's why that stuff sells, is because we're all looking for a system to buy into, of some sort. It's the true individual is a very rare thing.
Yeah. And because I've seen the negatives, or because I've seen like how bad things can go, um, really like fiercely attaching to a certain system or a way of thinking, like I don't know, it's just really like brought into my awareness, I think, of resisting like that impulse to try to find a certain framework, or like find the person that really has a good handle on things. And I think that by doing that, it's uh it's kind of opened up a lot more, like the world is just has more depth, I guess, and it's more interesting. And but it's also a scary thing to do, to cut off every system or like framework or philosophy, or to cut those things away and to really like perceive your reality as you perceive it, and to really like trust yourself and things like that. um so I think it's still like a long process, but I mean, I think that's the one big thing that I've caught on to so far.
Yeah, I mean that's something that most people never see or never learn is to have that autonomy. Um, have you had any uh, have you had any big wins or any big revelations in that realm? Like, has there been anything where you're like, or even small things like, oh yeah, I like this food. And I never thought I did because, people told me that this was bad for you or this was bad or like is there anything that you've kind of discovered that has been positive through this new thinking?
Well, the first thing that came to mind is, you know, when your entire backdrop is like, um, that you're in this sort of harrowing spiritual battle all the time, and that's what your life is. Like, I don't know if other people in the group experienced it, but I th like that can't be good for like your nervous system. It can't be good for your physical health or your mind even. Like to be constantly in that state of um I guess like knowing that your life is has like universal implications and that you're like using even their words that going through the lake of fire, which is what they called going through this suffering in this life, like that's the hardest. They would say that's the hardest thing in the world any person can do. So coming from that framework of like um, of that really stressful thing, um, it's I've been, I guess, surprised how just enjoying really seemingly insignificant things is like an okay thing to do. Like
It's a
that
beautiful thing to do.
yeah, like that it's a normal thing to
Yeah.
do, that it's you know, and you know, I've found out that I have dissociation working with a trauma specialist, and that was a revelation for me. So essentially, you're kind of detached from your physical senses, and it's just something that develops over time. So as I'm coming out of dissociation, things like sight and hearing and smell and taste and touch, like all those things are starting to become more vivid. So it's I've been surprised how it's both a normal thing and a healthy thing to just be neutral.
Hmm.
Like to just do something that has no meaning to it. Like reading a book that is not doesn't have anything to do with learning something. It's
For fun.
just things like that. And
Yeah, life, it sounds like in the environment that is so focused on suffering, you could easily um, be a person that shuts off and dissociates, like you said, from any enjoyment of life because suffering seems to be the thing you're going for. And it would be easy to shut those things off. I can say that as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, um, the the focus on all the things you do in life having some sort of universal significance, though it might not have been quite the same as yours. We had our own way of looking at it, but that the stress of that, I mean, I think it kind of, especially if you're a sincere person, it kind of burns out your adrenals a little bit. It's adrenaline fatigue. Um,
Mm.
it's just so stressful, and it's a state of high anxiety, and it's not an easy way to live. And then to come out and to just be able to read something that because you enjoy it, and that's good enough. Like it doesn't have to have universal appeal. It's just something that appeals to you and you enjoy it. Like that's a really free place to be compared to thinking that everything you do has so much hanging on it, the weight of the world, literally. So um, I'm glad to see that you've been able to find some of that. Um,
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that how that manifests in other groups, and it's yeah, definitely uh, there's that weird element of where the spirituality is kind of dismissive of your physical experience, and so it just kind of there is no way that all of that stuff couldn't affect your physiology.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, what's the opposite? Well, I don't know if this is psychologically true, but I'm just going to say this. Logically, the opposite of dissociation is being present.
Hmm.
And what you are doing as you say these different things are being turned back on for you is you are becoming present. It's like almost if you were to do like a mindfulness meditation, um, focusing on the breath, focusing on the present moment, things like that. To be able to experience that after dissociation, even in little bites as it comes back to you or whatever, um, that's a that's a big thing, man. That's progress. That's a really huge um, I don't know if you want to say milestone or whatever to be able to hit is to be able to experience that. And I mean, I did not experience things quite the same as what you're describing here, but I will say that since being out of the cult of Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's been 3 years now, I guess, just over three. The things that do occur on a daily basis, I can be more present with, and I am more focused on just the small little wins of life or just beautiful moments or things that happen than I ever was in a life where I was so focused on the Bible and the witness teachings and the
Your
things.
thoughts.
Yeah, your thoughts. Yeah, yeah. Because you can be just as addicted to your thoughts as you can be to a drug or alcohol or whatever. We can get trapped in our minds, and to be able to come back out of our own mind and to participate again in life actively and presently, that's a beautiful thing. And so I'm really really happy for you that you're starting to get that again.
Thank you.
I really hope that you continue on that path. I'm sorry that it was kind of stolen from you like it was. It's not uh, obviously ideal. It's a setback, but it doesn't. It's not the end, and you've got a lot to look forward to as you start to get those things back. And I think on some level, um, maybe I appreciate some of the things that I have now and that I can be present with more because I lost them for so long. And I mean, that's kind of a cliche. Um, but the feelings that I have about those things now that I've gotten back or that I get to experience now for the first time at 41 years old. It's I don't know.
That's really true. I think it does actually make it more well, yeah, I mean it definitely makes you appreciate it a lot more, and it there's also, I don't know if you've experienced it, but like kind of also a sadness
Oh yeah.
about
Yeah, there's a grief.
like like that you weren't seeing the world like, you know, that you were seeing everything like much more diminished before.
Yes. To pretty much everything in life there is a good and a bad. There are a few things that are all good or all bad. And just as on one side of the pendulum swing, you've got that feeling of gratitude and impact that this new free life gives you. On the other side, when the pendulum swings the other way, there are those lows where you realize that you missed out on things, or it just sucks to have thought that to feel like you were tricked for a while. That really sucks. um, I remember hearing a podcast one day, and it was just about it's about Christmas, and it was kind of just showing how like there were some kids who believed in whose parents went through elaborate ruses to make their kids believe in Santa Claus. And spoiler alert, there's no Santa Claus for anyone listening. Um, these kids though reacted in different ways. There were kids who were appreciated who appreciated after the fact as adults looking back that their parents went to such lengths to keep the magic alive for them. And then there were other adults that realized that as kids how they were tricked, that were really devastated by it and the lengths that their parents went to trick them to keep some dream alive. And we all react differently to things, and there's a yin and a yang. And it's normal in the grieving process to feel those intense moments of freedom, but then at the same time, or maybe not the same time, but not shortly thereafter, to feel intense moments of grief and pain over what was lost, or um, the fact that we were tricked by somebody. It doesn't feel good to realize that we're all human and that we are all subject to those things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting about the Christmas or the Santa Claus reactions.
Yeah, yeah, I thought that was fascinating, and I remember thinking immediately after hearing it that kind of made me. That was the first time I realized that intentionally or not, I was tricked. Whether anyone had malice in doing so or not, I was given a false worldview. I was given something that um, that was kind of, honestly, looking back, a waste of my time, and that set me back and gave me pain. Um, but there are very few people in this life who escape life without that. And if it wasn't joining a cult, let's not fool ourselves into think it wouldn't have, couldn't have been something else. Because there are very few people who live just, happy lives throughout. We all go through these periods. Well, suffering is a part of life, and we all go through these periods of it. But on the other side of that, it can be great joy
Hmm.
as we grow and learn.
And, experiencing that suffering with an autonomous, kind of view of the world, is a different experience, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I really agree. So, where are you at kind of now in your journey? It seems like obviously you're still growing. Is there anything that you're looking forward to, or anything?
Yeah, I've started doing like therapy for like my dissociation like 6 months ago, and so I've been doing that, and it's definitely kind of opening up the world more. And I I know how important, because the cult is so isolating. Not to mention, I wasn't even seeing these people in real life on a even a weekly
Oh wow,
basis.
yeah.
Um, just like I know, like I'm learning how important it is to have a support system. Um, uh, just in general, obviously, but when it just isolation's not good. When you're trying to make sense of all this stuff. And so I'm definitely getting more to the point of wanting to leave behind that whole isolated way of living and, start developing friendships, however that pans out. And really, just doing something more healthy in that way. And Um, I'm currently living in a really small town, and population 250. There's really like nobody that I know besides my family is close by. So in January, I'm moving myself and my business um, to a bigger city, and I'm hoping to grow the business and start to branch out a little bit more. I don't really have any like concrete plans at this moment. I'm still just like enjoying like the smaller things like we talked about. And oh, interestingly enough, the girlfriend that I had in high school for 4 years, she we that I split up with, we were very close. Like it didn't end badly. But we hadn't spoken in like 12 years. And then literally like 2 weeks after I was shunned, she contacted me.
Hmm.
And that, and she's married now and everything. And so it's been really nice to have her like as a friend, again. And going through all this, she's entering the social work field, and so she kind of has a frame of reference for a lot of these things. So she's been a really great encouragement, through this process.
That is awesome. I am really happy for you. Um, that's a. It's funny how things work out sometimes, isn't it? 2 weeks later, she reaches out to you.
Yeah.
Just never know
Um,
what life will hold.
yeah, it's interesting. And she has this weird fascination with cults as well. Like when we started talking about everything, like she has this weird fascination with cults. Well, it's not weird; it's normal.
Hmm.
And so it was just weird how it all kind of pieced together when she contacted me. So
Oh, that's awesome. Maybe I get a new listener out of it. Shameless plug to your friend. Um, is there anything um, that I wasn't able to that I didn't ask you that you specifically wanted to say? Like
hmm.
I know I gave you the questions or whatever, and we kind of went off script a lot there. I didn't know if there was anything you spent time, maybe formulating an answer to that you would like to say. Like if you could say anything to your family and friends that shun you or something like that, if you had anything to say to those people.
Um, Well, I guess it's been interesting seeing the way like like because my family wasn't in the cult, um, so they thought I was in a cult while I was in the cult, and you know, they just didn't get it and stuff like that. Um, but it's been interesting to see now that I'm out of it that I don't know what value this holds in sharing it, but like um it's been normal. Like it's been a normal occurrence for me to realize that a lot of people don't realize the significance of being in a cult, and it's not something that's easy to communicate to people because they tend to it tends to maybe make them uncomfortable or at the thought of that, or they um they think that once you're out of the cult that you're just like happy like to be out and that it should be something that you should kind of move on from very quickly.
Yeah.
And so I guess it would be for anyone else that's gone through that experience that like for myself, I haven't really been able to talk to a lot of ex-cult members, but it's I can definitely relate to the people feeling like um people don't really see the depths, I guess, of how that experience kind of impacts your life.
Yeah, for sure. Um, people, well, for one thing, people don't like to see other people hurt. So it's easy for people that care about you to kind of dismiss what you're going through a little bit, just because they don't want it to be. They want you to be okay. They want you to be happy because they care about you. But it's also, on the other hand, they can't understand if they've never been through it, and it is a difficult thing to explain to people. It really is. It's a very unique experience that, thankfully, I guess, a lot of people will never have to go through. But it is a process when you come out. You don't just leave those things behind immediately. You have to. You spent 8 years in. You're not going to just walk away one day and be happy. It's not the way it works. Um,
Yeah, and be careful that you don't join another cult. So
yes, yeah, that can be a very dangerous path for many. They just jump out of one into another. Um,
yeah.
what about the people that shun you now, from that group? Is there anything that you would say to them, or anything you would say to your old group?
Um, well, that's been a process in itself. Um, but yeah, I would just wish to communicate to them how I don't know if sincere is the right word, but how much I really believed what they believed, and that I would also probably get into explaining, more of the physiological components maybe that contributed to the way I acted, and that it's very dangerous for cults to keep you from uh to keep you from people that have a better understanding of the way the body works and deals with trauma or whatever you want to call it, um, and that there is a real like physiology to the way those things affect us, that can really confuse the mind and the body. And so I don't know, like I know it's pretty common for cults to keep people from the world of psychotherapy or like mental health or
Yeah.
areas. And that's one thing that I feel is definitely dangerous. And it's a little it's kind of one of those like it's easy to say that a cult is dangerous for like keeping someone from medical care for some virus, or like
Right. For physical
it's one
disease.
thing,
Yeah.
but they also keep people from stuff that can really help them, like my dissociation therapy. It's like literally physical rehabilitation type stuff. So they really don't know what they're like. They they have a lot of um blind spots, and they have a lot of things that they don't understand about the world.
Yeah. When you're so focused on one book, let's say the Bible, that's literally all you can see, you're missing out on a lot of what's going on in the world.
Like even washing your hands before eating or something.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you just can't be that focused on any one thing and still live a healthy life. It's just not going to happen. Um,
Oh, this week hmm, I don't know if it would be of interest, but they dissolved their group, had a major falling out this past week that I found out about a couple days ago. Um, and there was a major doctrinal dispute that literally almost split the group in half, I think. And so it's kind of no longer the group that it was, I guess you could say. So that's been kind of, it's just a weird thing to see something like that happen. And uh, there is a blogger actually that has been trying to expose this cult for a long time. Um, and so I guess apparently he has insider access to the cult
hmm,
without them knowing.
interesting.
So there may be some ethical issues going on there. I don't know, but
What's
um,
the blogger's name or site?
um, I think it's IWWB exposed, I think.
Gotcha.
So like some communications have come out since the fallout that he publicly shared that really show very concrete terms that Mike Vinson is really controlling and very like it kind of it was difficult. Like you get subtle ideas over the years, but like this the stuff that's happened recently, and the things that he's said and done, like it's becomes very overt, and very obvious that he's more concerned about um keeping people in his group, people that are being swept away by the other group, that his main that and just to see his tactics that he uses for trying to elicit fear in people that go to the other side. It's just like it's kind of vindicating, but not in a really powerful way. But it's just very weird to
Yeah.
see it now, like in an overt way.
Fear is the one tool that cults use for everything. uh, um, it really all just boils down to that. You scare people and control them through fear. And, hopefully whatever this schism is will result in maybe some other people finding some freedom and some happiness in life as well. Um,
Hmm.
And it's a shame that these things continue to go on, but chances are, as long as humans exist, that will happen because fear is a very powerful tool. It's a powerful thing that causes sometimes human beings to do unspeakable things, and it's just not a super healthy tool to use.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad that you were able to get out. I'm glad that you've got professional help, through therapists that can help you to deal with your dissociation and to find the small wins, the color in life, the joy. And I hope that I hope you continue down that path, and I wish you well on the move. I hope that goes well, that you start making some friends, that you're not isolated, and that you can make a life that's everything you end up wanting it to be, and express your true, authentic self without fear or without judgment. I think that's something that all of us are really looking for.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you also for the forum, to do these kinds of things and to connect in this way.
It's my pleasure, man. I'm glad to help. I really want to thank Nicholas for working through the mental trauma that he's been through and speaking about this, even though it was very difficult for him at times. I've been in touch with him after the interview, and because I do stay a few months ahead, so it's been a little while since I've spoken to Nicholas, but he's doing much better. He's gone through various treatments for trauma. He's made his move to the big city, and I couldn't be happier for him. Things seem to be going much better. If you'd like to send a message of support to Nicholas, you can do so by going to shunnedpodcast.com, where you can leave a comment for him on his episode. You can also find the resources mentioned in any episode there. You can find a video for the song that he chose to represent his journey. Nicholas chose the song Here in the Vineyard by Anna and Elizabeth to represent his journey. While you're at shunnedpodcast.com, you can also send me an email. You can send me a voicemail that I can use on the show. There's a tab on the right of each page where you can ask questions or leave comments that I can address on the podcast. You could even support the show by picking up a t-shirt or a hoodie on the store on the site. So there's some Shun swag there for you. All right, now that's not the only place you can comment on the episode or get involved. We also have a Facebook group called Shun Podcast where people get together and discuss episodes. We discuss our own lives. We try to do some fun things, build community, try to be upbuilding and supportive. I also announce things in there before anywhere else. I've even started this month. I started an Apostapets post where everybody shared their four-legged apostates in their homes, and that was kind of fun. You can also find the podcast on YouTube under the channel Shun Podcast, on Instagram at Shun Podcast, or on Twitter at Shun Podcast. And in all cases, those are one word. If you'd like to hear my story and insight into how the cult of Jehovah's Witnesses works, you can do so at the podcast called This JW Life, also found at thisjwlife.com. I'd like to take the time to just thank everybody that helps me to make this show possible by supporting it financially. It does take time and energy, effort. There are expenses along with hosting audio and the website, transcripts, all that stuff. As you know from the vidcast I posted at the beginning of the year, I've stepped back from some cleaning work so that I can make some time for doing double episodes this month or this year, doing 2 a month. So if you want to support it, if you can, it's up to you. It's encouraging to see people who want to support what I'm doing here. And you can do so at patreon.com/shunned if you're so inclined. If you don't have the means or aren't so inclined, you can also support the podcast, both Shunned or This JW Life. One of the best things you can do is to recommend the podcast on other social media, to share it so that other people can find it. And then also, if you can leave a 5-star review on iTunes or maybe even podcast apps, wherever you can do so, that helps the show to get found in searches, and then more people can find it. And I mean, I hear all the time, I get the emails from people who are being helped through listening. And ultimately, that's what this is about. I want to help as many people as possible. So the more time I have to dedicate to it, and the more the podcast shows up in these different, essentially with their search engines through these different podcast apps, then more people can find that help. In the next episode, it's going to be the story of Georgia. Georgia was one of Jehovah's Witnesses and even grew up in the now infamous Fremont congregation, where Candace Conti, one of the first big court cases ever over sexual abuse inside the cult, was from. Georgia also experienced rape in her own life, and unfortunately, and you're going to see how that was handled and the fallout from it as it all relates to her life story. We're going to close the episode out today. I guess it really doesn't matter what time I'm doing this. But we're going to close the episode out at whatever time it is for you with the song No Hell Yet by Fair Voyeur. You can find the link to her songs, to the Patreon page, to resources mentioned and more, not just on the website, but if you're listening on a podcast app, you can also get it all in the app by looking at the description. One last reminder, don't forget to sign up for the 4-week coaching/support group that'll be starting Sunday, March 10th. Seats are limited. I just need 6 people. And I look forward to seeing you join others and discovering things about your own life and journey. Just go to shunnedpodcast.com/coaching, or just go to the website and you'll see the page for coaching. And if you sign up there, we'll get you on board, and I'm really looking forward to doing this. So as we end all episodes, love others, do no harm, and go be happy.
Curse God.